us pray to the Lord. Shine within our hearts, loving Master, the pure light of your divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our minds that we may comprehend the message of your gospel. Instill in us also reverence for your blessed commandments, so that having conquered all sinful desires, we may pursue a spiritual life, thinking and doing all those things that are pleasing to you. For you, Christ our God, are the light of our souls and bodies. And to you we give glory, together with your Father, who is without beginning, and your all-holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and forever, and to the ages of ages. Amen. I have the honor of introducing Dr. Jeannie Constantinou to you today. Thank you very much for coming to listen to what she has to tell us about the book of Revelation. And I want to thank you, and I want to tell you that it is an honor to have Dr. Jeannie Constantinou in Fort Wayne. This retreat was organized by our church, Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church, by St. John Chrysostom Antiochian Orthodox Church, and by St. Nicholas Orthodox Cathedral here in Fort Wayne. We came together to organize this retreat with Dr. Jeannie Constantinou. Before I say a few words about Dr. Jeannie Constantinou herself, I want to give you a little bit of a background of her formation, because you will see that she has a specific style. And her style was formed in the history of the Orthodox Church. Why do I mean about that? Between the 700s and the 1800s, much of the Christian East, the Middle East, the Balkans, were under Muslim rule. And wherever Islam took over a Christian territory by sword, they allowed the Christians to exist, to pay higher taxes, but they didn't allow them to have any theological schools or to do any charitable work or missionary work. The fact that they were not allowed to have any theological schools forced the Orthodox Christians to go to Western universities if they wanted to study some theology. And they came back to their homeland, now many of them as bishops, but with a Western influence in their theology. This is what happened for more than 1,000 years in the Middle East and the Balkans. In the rest of the Orthodox Christian world, in Russia, something else happened. In the early 1700s, the Tsar Peter the Great, who was a big admirer of everything Western European, decided to introduce a lot of Western European ideas and customs into his country, into Russia. And because of this, the Russian Orthodox Church experienced a Western influence. We are still struggling in the Orthodox Church with this Western influence in theology, in our theology. Having said all of this, I should also tell you that that undercurrent started by the Holy Fathers of the Orthodox Church, of the early Orthodox Church, of the Cappadocian Fathers, and even the Holy Fathers before them. That current was still present in the life of the church, but it was an undercurrent that was happening in the monasteries. We still had people like St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain, St. Macarius of Corinth, St. Paisi Velichikovsky, and St. Cosmas Ayatollahs, who kept the living tradition of the Orthodox Church, this beautiful connection between the Bible and the rest of the life of the church, and the Bible to be understood in the context of the church. What happened in the West in the meantime, because of scholasticism, because of this way of looking at things in a very organized way and in boxes, the Bible was separated from the rest of the church more and more. Until today, I mean, in more recent years, in the West, we have many biblical scholars who do not believe in God. They're atheists, but they are studying the Bible and having high opinions about the Bible. Or many opinions about the Bible, I should say. Dr. Constantinou was blessed to study both, as Father Michael emphasized last night, and he told us about her many degrees. Some of them about biblical studies, some of them about the Holy Fathers. And she was immersed into both worlds, and she knows very good biblical scholarship, but she knew, as St. Basil the Great would say, to pick up the nectar from the flowers and then to give us a beautiful bouquet of flowers and a very sweet and real honey. The so-called, as she likes to call it, the phronima of the church, the mindset of the church. Because in the Orthodox Church, we had biblical scholars, St. John Chrysostom, St. Basil the Great, you name it, St. Ephraim the Syrian, wrote commentaries on the Bible, but they wrote them in the spirit, in the spirituality of the Orthodox Church. And this is what Dr. Constantinou has been doing and is doing. And that's her great gift that she's offering to the Orthodox Church. I also want to tell you about a wonderful book, one of the many books that she wrote, Thinking Orthodox. In this book, she reveals this way of thinking, this Orthodox way of thinking. And I want to share with you that I appreciated Dr. Constantinou very much before last summer, but I appreciate her even more since last summer. Why this? Because I've been listening to her podcast, I read her book, Thinking Orthodox, and then last summer, I went to the Clergy Laity Congress of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. And Dr. Jeannie Constantinou and I and many other people were in a room at a workshop at what was supposed to be a panel discussion where we were told that if we have any questions, not to go to the microphone, but to write our questions on a piece of paper, they're going to be answered at the end. Not very Orthodox phronima. And we're presented with some ideas that were not part of the Orthodox way of thinking. Dr. Jeannie Constantinou, even if she was told that nobody is allowed to go to the microphone, she went to the microphone and she expressed the Orthodox phronima, the Orthodox way of thinking. I'll never forget that, because I realized many of us in the room were afraid to speak up. She was not afraid. She went to the microphone and she spoke what was the Orthodox phronima. Because first of all, the Orthodox phronima is to listen to each other and to be like the Holy Trinity. So thank you very much, Presbytera, for doing that. And I could see that she believes in what she teaches. And she practices what she teaches. And that's why I appreciate her even more. And that's when I told her, we talked before about having her in Fort Wayne for a retreat. And I told her after that meeting that we really want to have her in Fort Wayne for our Great Lent retreat. And here she is. God bless you and welcome among us, Dr. Constantinou.
Okay, let's see if I can keep this on and keep it from making too much noise. Thank you, Father. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here in Fort Wayne at this beautiful church. And also, it's very interesting. This has never happened before. I'm being shared by 3 parishes. We were at St. John Antiochian last night, where I gave a little bit of an introduction. And then tomorrow, I'm going to be at St. Nicholas, the OCA Cathedral. So it's been kind of fun, actually. At any rate, that's very nice of you to say about the clergy laity, what happened in the clergy laity. Yes, what happened there, was that we were being told these things, and the Orthodox view was not being presented. Okay, we're getting this sometimes these days. And I know that many clergy want to say something, but it's difficult for them. And that this comes from being a presbytera of a priest who is retired. So I don't have to worry about what people will say or how it might affect my husband. So I hate to say it that way, but it's the truth. At any rate, I want to just let you know what's going to happen. We're a little bit behind schedule. We're going to try to stick with a schedule. I just want to let you know what to expect today. We are going to spend about an hour and 5 minutes on each session. After this first session, we're going to have a break for memorial because today is a psychosabbaton. We're going to pray for the souls. And then we're going to have lunch. And then after that, we're going to have basically an hour and 5 minutes. You'll have a break in between because I know sometimes you want to get up. It's a little bit difficult when you're sitting in pews. You're going to have an opportunity to take a break. And we'll have some time for question and answers at the end. And at the very end of the day, we'll also have some time for discussion and questions and answers. I hope everybody can see the screen because especially this very first part, we're going to be talking about what does it mean, the book of Revelation as apocalyptic literature. What does this mean? And this first part, I think, is very instructive. So here we go. All right, so the book of Revelation is also known as the Apocalypse. In Greek, we call it the Apocalypse. It's unique in the Bible for many reasons. It's the only fully apocalyptic book in the Bible. There are other sections of the Bible that we call apocalyptic. In other words, they're written in a certain style, and that's Daniel, some other prophets, some sections of the prophets, parts of the Gospels. But this is the only book of the Bible that's really apocalyptic, and it's the only really prophetic book of the New Testament. Jesus, of course, makes prophecies and things like this. But this is the only book that's primarily prophecy. It's the only book that instructs Christians to actually read it, and it blesses them. We don't have that in any other book. It's the only book that in the Bible that was rejected. I mean, it was accepted and then rejected and then accepted again in the Eastern Church. I don't think I mentioned this. It's the only book that's known by two different names, Apocalypse and Revelation. We use them interchangeably. So this is also, for us, the only book of the New Testament that we never read in the church. And last night is when I explained that, when we had that reason about the formation of the canon and how it happened that the Apocalypse came to be rejected by the Greek Orthodox in the early years, later got accepted by the Georgians and the Russians and the Armenians before it was accepted by the Greeks universally. What is apocalyptic literature? This is what we're going to talk about today. Why is Revelation so strange? Why did John write it? And can it be used to predict when the end of the world will take place? Who was the author? Why did he write it? What is the historical context? Actually, I think that next part is going to come in part two, the last two. So let's talk about apocalyptic literature. What is this? This is a literary genre. It seems unique to us because the book of Revelation is the only apocalyptic book in the New Testament. But as a genre, it's a style of writing. It is not unique. It was very popular among the Jews from about 200 BC until about 200 AD. Okay, first among the Jews in the BC, and then among the Christians in the AD. And of course, the Christians followed the Jews in using this style of writing. And this was especially popular because apocalyptic writing was popular among people suffering persecution. So coming out of Judaism, the Christians were the ones who copied this form of expression, this style of writing, because they came out of Judaism, of course. And as I said, it's popular among those suffering persecution. So what are the characteristics of apocalyptic writing, the apocalyptic literary genre? First, there's a specific worldview, and second, there's a specific literary style. So we'll talk about the worldview. What is the worldview of apocalyptic? God's people are suffering unjust persecution. The world is under the control of Satan, who operates through governments and institutions to oppress the people of God and destroy them. God will grant victory to the righteous. In other words, there's always a promise. Apocalyptic literature, even though people think apocalypse, it seems, it's all about death and destruction. It's not. It's actually hopeful because there's a promise of deliverance by God, or there's a promise that God will reward people who are faithful until the end. All right, so apocalyptic literature is not about doom and death and destruction, but about perseverance by the faithful people, and that God will reward them in the end, or they will be delivered from their enemies. Now, this worldview in a non-religious extreme also exists. We see this apocalyptic worldview about unjust persecution, the governments under the control of Satan, in groups like Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses are very apocalyptic. So are the Seventh-day Adventists. But Jehovah's Witnesses, very much so, especially against governments. That's why they don't salute the flag. They don't recognize any holidays and things like this. They have still a very strong apocalyptic worldview. In politics, people are creating an apocalyptic worldview in a lot of ways, and this is something that we see, or young people are unfortunately sometimes affected by this. They're told, for example, global warming, it's an existential threat. That means a threat to our existence. This is presented apocalyptically. All right, not in a religious context, but still it's very apocalyptic. Unless we do this, the world's going to come to an end. We are the right people. Everybody else is misguided. And you see what I'm trying to say? That has been going on for a long time. And we've seen that, especially in the environmental movement and in other political contexts. Even what we're seeing right now, I don't want to bring politics into this, but I want you to start thinking about how people present their worldview. Trump is Hitler. This is the end of our democracy. Okay, but you could apply that to practically any president or any regime. Look at how the people who are in opposition to whatever's going on, or sometimes they're the people in power who want to maintain a certain perspective, and the idea is to frighten people. So we have to, especially with young people, there aren't too many here among who are teenagers or college students, but especially the teenagers, they become very alarmed. And they think, oh, the world's going to come to an end. I'm not going to survive. This kind of a thing. And that's very deliberate. People don't realize that they're presenting things apocalyptically, but they are. So I'm just telling you this. So this is a worldview that we see in the book of Revelation and other forms of apocalyptic literature. But this idea of disaster, impending disaster, and everybody else is against us is something that we see even in the culture. Okay? So just think about that next time. So eventually God and the good will triumph over the devil and evil, but in the meantime, we have to remain patient and faithful. So now let's talk about the apocalyptic literary style. This is where what you're gonna notice the most, because we're familiar with some of the words of Revelation. So apocalyptic writings typically describe a glimpse into heaven or the future. We have this in the book of Revelation. Certainly John gets glimpses into the future, but also he's literally transported up to heaven in chapter 4, what we call the throne room scene. It says, and lo, I see an open door into heaven. And a voice said, come up here. And immediately he goes up there to heaven. And then he describes the throne room scene. The Lamb appears. You have the elders and the angels around the throne of God. That's very common that apocalyptic writing will have something like that. Another element of apocalyptic writing is that heavenly guides will explain what the person, the seer, is experiencing or seeing, okay? And that we see that also. We have John, he's weeping. Nobody's worthy to open the scroll. And an elder there says, don't cry, here's the Lamb. He's going to open the scroll. Or an angel will explain something to him, or an elder will explain something to him. Apocalyptic literature is characterized by symbolic numbers, animals, colors, and cosmic signs. This is very common, of course, in the book of Revelation. So this is typical apocalyptic. So In order for you to understand the book of Revelation, I would like to explain to you how symbols work. And I'm going to be using symbols from our own culture so that you can understand how the people who received the book of Revelation understood it. Because it's very mysterious to us, but it wasn't to the people who are part of John's community. That's first century Roman province of Asia Minor, probably Hellenistic Jewish communities, mostly Hellenistic Jewish Christian communities. So let's talk about symbols. So because when they read the book of Revelation, they understood it. It wasn't a mystery to them. Occasionally you'll hear some preacher who will say that he is the one who finally figured out what Revelation means. Well, the people who received the book, they understood it because they were familiar with the symbols, just as we are familiar with the symbols of our time. And so we just kind of naturally understand it because these are familiar symbols to us. Okay, so here you have the symbol of a stop sign. So if you were driving and you saw that, oops, I don't know what happened there. Here we go. Okay, if you were driving and you saw that, you would know what it meant, even if it didn't have the word stop, right? You could recognize that from the shape and the color. So the same thing, let's say you're driving in Saudi Arabia or something, you know what that means, even if you don't read Arabic. Some of you certainly do, but most of us don't. So some symbols have become international. How often have you said, oh, there's a parking space, and then you drive up and you see this? Nobody has to say, don't park here, this is for handicapped parking. You know the symbol for handicapped parking. What about this? This has become a universal symbol around the United States. What is it? Library. An L, a person reading a book. There you go. I don't even have to put it up there, you know. Sometimes you need special training for symbols. These are musical symbols. If you're musical, you played piano, you sing in a choir, you understand this is a rest, this is a sharp, a flat, an eighth note, a whole note, a rest, a treble clef. These are all things very familiar to musicians. If you're not a musician, it's meaningless. And you don't even, it's a big mystery. You don't understand how it works. This is not a mystery to any child who's 3 years old. They know about French fries. Sometimes, I don't know if they still have these places where you used to jump in the balls or crawl around or play. A lot of those got shut during COVID. But that was, you know, you drive past, So, you know, grandparents, parents know all about this. What is this? The Nike swoosh. So have you ever gone to, maybe you're going to go back home to Palestine or to Greece or to Cyprus, and they'll ask you, bring something back. They don't want generic tennis shoes. They want Nike or something like this. They know brands. This is an international brand. Now, these symbols are really understood in America. I don't know how well people in the rest of the world, they've heard the words maybe Democrat or Republican, just like we understand there's a Labor Party or other parties in other countries. But the symbol is something we understand. It's not something that other people in other countries will understand because that's specific to American culture. So this symbol is relatively new. What is this symbol? That's right. That started to appear in the 1970s. What about this one? Windows. Yep. And this was not always a symbol of Microsoft. It's only when they developed Windows. So now this is Microsoft and Windows. So of course the cross is a very old symbol. So whether or not we understand a symbol depends upon a lot of factors, okay? Our age, our culture, our exposure to that symbol. So this NRA, today when we say NRA, people think National Rifle Association. Who's old enough to remember this from the Depression? The National Recovery Act. Okay, so this is, that was when Roosevelt was trying to get from the Great Depression people back to work. So again, that's just not really this particular symbol. This is not the symbol, but it's the idea behind it. The letters also stand for something. This is something that first made its appearance during World War II. Gold Star families, these people would hang this in their window. in how many people were serving in the military during World War II, and you see that and they would embroider it. One is a gold star. This means this person died. Somebody from the family died during the war. So this is something, actually, we have a banner like that in the church in San Diego, and with stars of all the different people who were serving back in the military. A couple of them are gold. So for the first couple of years that this was popular, only teens and young adults were on this, Facebook. They all abandoned it as soon as their parents and grandparents started to join it too. Then they wanted nothing to do with it. They all went to Instagram or TikTok or something like this. But we all know this is Facebook. So symbols can also change in meaning. Once upon a time, when I was a kid, Apple was the Beatles record label, right? Now it's Apple, the iPhone, the computers, etc. So the same symbol can have a different meaning depending upon how it appears. So we have this, the Star of David. It's very important for the Jewish people. They love it. It's a symbol of the modern state of Israel. It's a symbol of their faith. But sometimes one time it appeared like this, the patch that Jews had to wear in Nazi Germany. Now it's a negative symbol because it's a reminder of persecution for them. So again, the symbol can change. And we see this also in the book of Revelation. There are lots of examples of symbols that can have a positive connotation or a negative connotation, depending upon how it's presented or who's looking at it even, okay? So because of where or how the image is presented, according to who's viewing it. So of course, this is a very important symbol for us, where most of us are very proud of our country. We're proud of our flag. We don't like to see people destroying it. But the idea about stars and stripes can also, even in America, have a negative connotation. Now, in the South, this is called the stars and bars. This symbol was removed from a number of flags in the American South because it was very offensive to African Americans. So there are a lot of white Southerners, however, who look at this with a lot of pride because it doesn't represent slavery to them. It represents their culture, okay? So that's why there were so many arguments about the stars and bars for the past few years. So we have to recognize that not everybody receives the symbols in the same way. There are some symbols that are so strong, so negative, so strongly associated with something evil or bad idea that they can never really have a neutral meaning, and this is one of them. So you see this, you might be watching a movie or something where you see swastikas around, like about Nazi Germany, and this is such a powerful graphic symbol that, immediately you look at this, I don't have to explain this. You think World War II, you think Hitler, you think Nazis, you think about all the death and destruction. This is a very powerful symbol, and nobody has to explain it. So what does all of this have to do with the book of Revelation? Well, the symbols of Revelation had a specific meaning in the early church and to the original audience to which the book was written. So that's some 1900 years ago. And if we wish to understand the apocalypse, we have to first understand the symbolic language of that time that was intended, the book was intended for the people who lived in those days. And this is the only way we are going to be able to understand it. Now, we can't just choose the meanings ourselves. And this is what happens a lot of times today with people who are reading Revelation. They use their imagination, or somehow they think God has given them some kind of unique insight into the meaning of the book. So, for example, when I was in college, the hot book was by a fellow named Hal Lindsey called The Late Great Planet Earth. And I remember reading that book, and I thought He understood everything about Revelation. He explained it. It made a lot of sense because I didn't know anything. So it made sense to me because this is part of the problem. When you don't know anything and you talk to somebody who seems to know what they're talking about, they explain things to you. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. That's why, like Father said, we don't just trust our own opinions. We trust what the church has told us because the church knows better than we do. Okay? So it's like, you can convince a little child of anything. A 5-year-old, you can convince them of anything, and they'll believe you. So we have to remember that we are children spiritually, and we have to trust the church, not just believe what people say. So there are many people who read the book of Revelation, and they come up with the meaning from their own imagination, not really by looking at the history or what the meaning of the symbols was at that time, because John's community understood it. So here we have this symbol. Everybody knows what it means. It's McDonald's, the golden arches, the big M. Okay, what if I took this and I said it means Mississippi or Mexico or, I don't know, something else? Would I be correct? Can I just decide that this is what it means? Because that's what people are doing. Read the book of Revelation, and they tell us what it means. In other words, they're changing the meaning of the symbol that had a very specific meaning for John and for his congregation. So that just because I can give you all kinds of reasons why this M means that, by the way, someday when, I don't know how long our country will be here, but someday there'll be archaeologists digging our country up and looking for clues about how we used to live. They're going to find a lot of M's. And they're going to wonder, was this a cult? Must have been some religion, They're going to be using their imagination like 1,000 years from now. What were all these M's? People were coming to this place with the M. Must have been some god they were worshiping. No, I'm not kidding. Because we're not going to leave as many things behind because everything we have is electronic. That might not be around. Other cultures have inscriptions. How would we know anything about ancient Rome? They chiseled things into stone. What are people going to look at to figure out our culture? Even 300 years ago, 400 years ago, people had writings, and those survived. Now we don't have anything in paper. We don't have anything in stone. It's all up in the clouds. Who's going to understand our culture in the future? But that is exactly what people do. When people just decide what a symbol means, that's what they're doing. When they interpret Revelation outside of its historical context, okay? So people who interpret the verbal symbols of Revelation according to their own opinion or their own imagination, rather than respecting their original meaning, are guilty of misusing the book and distorting it. And that's how they manipulate people. They say, this is what it means, and people say, oh yeah, that makes sense. I remember Hal Lindsey, the late great planetist. This was in the late 70s, okay? So somebody said, you have to read this book. I said, okay. And I was totally convinced. And this is what he said. This is 1970s. He said that there will be Armageddon when the Soviet Union and Red China, that's what we used to call Communist China, Red China get together. And this is only going to happen after the European Common Market, before there was a European Union, has its 10th member, and this is the 10 horns of the beast and all this. He's giving this very elaborate analysis, which me, as a 19-year-old, said, oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I get it. Now, this is what I have to do. This is because I don't want to follow the Antichrist, right? I don't want to be following the beast. I don't want to get the mark on my forehead and all this. So I was totally convinced. Well, that book is still being printed. Was he right in 1977? Of course not. Is he right today? Of course not. This is amazing to me. Think of the money that he has made. This book has sold millions of copies. And unashamedly, he doesn't say, I was wrong, because there's no Soviet Union anymore. That was obviously wrong. There's more than 10 members of the European Union. So that was wrong. They just keep changing it and publishing it and making money. This is part of it. Okay, but there's no recognition that you don't know what you're talking about. They just change the little details and keep publishing it and keep selling millions of copies. So we have to consider the source. People who interpret the symbols without regard to its actual historical meaning are either ignorant or charlatans. People who falsely interpret Revelation to frighten, deceive, or manipulate others are worse. Now this van, you can see it says Judgment Day, May 21st, 2011. I don't know if you could read that. So some years ago, some of you remember this, May 21st, 2011, there was a fellow named Harold Camping who had a Bible study on a big Christian radio network called Family Radio. And he was saying that the end of the world is going to come, or Christ will return on May 21st, 2011. And I heard about this for the first time a couple years before. Sometimes I would be driving and I would turn, because I didn't have in my car the ability to hear ancient faith radio. So I was turn on the regular radio and I would listen to him sometimes as I was driving someplace. And he was insisting, and I remembered May 21st because that's my husband's name day. So I was waiting for May 22nd, 2011 to see what he was going to say. Okay, now the popular media got wind of this only a couple of weeks or maybe a month before it started appearing on the news. Meanwhile, he'd been talking about this for several years. And people used to call up his, because he had a call-in radio show. And he had millions of people who listened to him around the world. This was a big, Family Radio is a big Christian network. And they said, but Brother Camping, what if Jesus doesn't come back? And he said, I've been studying this for 70 years. He is coming back. May 21st, 2011. You can count on it. And the other thing that's very ironic about this, which nobody could get him to explain, is he believed in predestination. Okay, like there's quite a few Christians who do. And so they'd say they made vans, they sent thousands of people out to warn people that Jesus was coming on May 21st, 2011. And so I have to say, people would call him up and say, but Brother Camping, if you believe that people are destined to be saved or to be damned, why warn them? What difference does it make? And he never answered that because it makes no sense. The whole Bible is telling us to repent. Well, if we have no control over our ultimate destiny, why repent? It doesn't make any difference. So this billboard was down the hill below the university when I was teaching there. And let's see if I can get my little light. Okay, you see this billboard. So this is below the university. It says Judgment Day, May 21st, 2011. And it says here Family Radio. Right here, there's a little seal, and it says, the Bible guarantees it. Okay, that's what it says. And here's a guy, here it says, cry mightily unto God, and this person is repenting. But why repent? I mean, I saw this is down below the street, just a regular street in San Diego. It was on benches, bus benches, vans. People quit their jobs to go around preaching and warning people that the world was going to come to an end. No, they didn't say that. Jesus was returning on May 21st. So that's brother. So let's go back. And so what happened? How sincere was he? 100% sincere. Thousands of people quit their jobs, maxed out their credit cards, stopped paying their mortgage because they were convinced, this happened, a lot of people, that Jesus was coming back. And so, anyhow, that's what happened. Very sincere. Sincerity has nothing to do with it. Whether you've studied the Bible 70 years has nothing to do with it. You don't know when Jesus is coming back. So what happened was on May 22nd, 2011, I tuned into Family Radio to hear what Brother Camping was going to say about the fact that Jesus didn't return. And so there was silence for like a week. All they did was play these songs, play music. So finally he came out because everybody wanted to hear what he had to say about it. And he said, Jesus came back invisibly. That's what he said. No, seriously, which of course doesn't make sense because we know what the Lord said about how it's going to be when he returned. And all this is based on his calculations, very elaborate calculations having to do with the date of the flood and all these other things. And then he said the real end of the world is going to happen 6 months from now, 6 months from that date, which was October 21st, 2011. So, of course, we waited for 6 months. And when the world was still here the next day on October 22nd, 2011, they said, Brother Camping, what do you think about this? And then he said, well, I guess I don't know when Jesus is coming back. And I said, join the rest of us He had a stroke and died a few months later, but he was elderly. He was elderly at the time. But the point is, people really changed their lives to their detriment because of him. And he wasn't intending to do any harm. What about people like David Koresh? Also, not necessarily intending to do some harm, but people died in that case, and that was apocalyptic, right? So we have to be super careful about who we follow. And again, it has nothing to do with how sincere they are, how well they know the Bible or anything. And there's a mentality that's required. So nonetheless, Revelation is prophecy, yes. It has a future fulfillment. It has a message for us today. That's the last session of the day. We're going to talk about that today. However, its purpose was never to serve as a roadmap to predict the end of the world. And those who try to use it that way are misusing it. This is Bible abuse. All right? Now, can it be used to predict when the end of the world will take place? No. That's not the reason why John wrote the book. So last night we were talking about context and purpose in a biblical interpretation. If the purpose of the book is to give you clues about the end and when it was going to take place and how, then you might be able to make that case. But John, the purpose of the book of Revelation is to encourage the faithful to be faithful throughout this periods of persecution and suffering, through the periods of tribulation. So it can't be used like that because it's not intended to use that way. The two most important points you must remember when interpreting the Bible, we talked about this last night. Context, the literary context, what is said before that statement, what happens after that statement so that you understand the statement correctly. Historical context, this is disappearing on me, I don't know why. Okay, and then the purpose, why that passage or book was written. So the purpose of Revelation was never to give us clues about the end of the world. That's not why John is writing the book. So logic demands that we begin with this premise. No author writes a book he believes will not be understood. People write books to communicate messages, expecting the book to be read and understood. Now, this means that John's audience, original audience, the 7 churches of Asia, understood it. Okay? So it might be a mystery to us because we don't understand the symbols, but they understood it. So anybody who says, well, it's a big mystery and I have all the keys and I understand it, nobody else understood it. And you know how many people have said that over the centuries? I alone understand it and I can predict this, and they've all been wrong. The author of Revelation knew his audience would understand the book, and they did understand it. Over time, however, the meaning of the symbols was lost because the culture changed. All right, so we're not living in first century Roman Asia Minor. We're not part of a little Jewish Christian communities to understand those symbols. So what did Christ say about whether we can know the time of the end? We're really good at this as Orthodox. It will come as a thief in the night when a time that people don't expect. Whatever we truly need to know, whatever Christ wanted us to know, he clearly and directly taught. He wouldn't leave us to guess about anything that was important. So he deliberately did not want us to know the time of the end, because it would be harmful for us to know the time of the end. We would go sinning right up to that time, right? That's what we would do, because that's who we are. Everyone who has ever predicted the end has been wrong, and there have been quite a few. What are the chances that today someone who is right, somebody who's predicting the end is right, somebody who's telling you this is the plan, they make these charts and they create these scenarios, very elaborate scenarios. What is the chance that they're right? 0. Everybody else has been wrong. Get a clue from all the people who have failed before you, but people don't stop. So why do they continue to try to predict the end? Why they continue, not just necessarily in terms of a date, like Harold Camping did, but a scenario. Why do they do that? Pride. What other reason? I know everybody else has been wrong before me, but I know. Here's another reason. The belief that they have some kind of special insight. God has told them, and oh yeah, I know what it is. The Holy Spirit has spoken to me. Sometimes people want to feel important. Other times they want to manipulate people, or they believe that they're in a position to manipulate people. And there's something, sometimes it's because there's nothing else to do because they're already saved. And this is something it took me a while to figure out. Why are so many Protestants obsessed with the book of Revelation? And it's not very important in the Orthodox Church, because we know that the reason why we're here on earth is to work hard for our salvation. If you believe you're already saved and you've got nothing to do, then of course you're going to be focused on Jesus and when he's coming back. So I think that there's some truth to that. So the Orthodox position is this. We believe what the Lord said. He says in the Holy Scriptures, no one knows the day or the hour. And by the way, this was interesting about Harold Camping. When people would call him up and say, but the Lord says we're not going to know. And he would say, but he wants you to know. That was before. And by the way, something else that was very interesting that he was doing is he was encouraging people to leave their churches. He said the age of the churches are completely corrupt. The age of the church is over. Don't go to any churches. Basically, just listen to me. Okay, that's basically what he was saying. So we believe the Lord. And he said no one's going to know. And that includes this scenario. And of course, we talk about this every Holy Week. This is what we have the first 3 nights of Holy Week. Palm Sunday evening, Holy Monday, Holy Tuesday. We have what we call the bridegroom service. He will come in the middle of the night. So let's talk about why Revelation is so strange, why it was written in that particular style. As I mentioned, it was part of the Jewish tradition, and it was something that was continued, especially during the early years of the church. And St. John, when he had this experience, and he writes as a function, he's functioning as a prophet, and his scriptures were the Old Testament. He didn't have a New Testament. He's reading Ezekiel and Isaiah and Joel and Daniel and the books of the Old Testament. So when he's looking for symbols to describe his experience, he's drawing on symbols from the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament. They were the scriptures for him. So it's natural that he would draw on those symbols. He's not copying them. You'll see that in Revelation, there are similarities, but it's never a direct copy. He's borrowing concepts from the Old Testament because he's looking for symbols. And there are symbols that would be common and natural for him. So for example, if a man is going to write a poem, he's going to describe his, to a girlfriend he loves. He's going to describe her, and what is he going to use as a symbol? Would he say, my love, your neck is like a tall tower, and your sheep are like a flock of goats, your teeth are like a flock of goats? That was very high praise. In biblical times, that's from the Song of Songs. But today he would say, you're like a beautiful red rose. He would use a symbol that people identify with as beautiful in our culture. So John's symbols are naturally going to come to his mind from the Old Testament, but he's not copying the Old Testament. He had his own experience, but he's using the symbols of that. That's why you see things that are not exactly the same as the Old Testament. For example, measuring the city with a rod and things like this. So St. John had a profound spiritual experience. And we often turn to metaphors or symbols to describe our experience because words, human language, fails us, especially to describe deep emotional experiences or spiritual experiences. So for example, if you're depressed and somebody says, well, how are you feeling? And you say, why do people used to say, oh, I'm blue? You ever think about that? Or you're red with anger, or you're green with envy. There are words and colors and images that are used to express something that really can't really be expressed with words. So if you're in love, you're going to say, I feel like I'm at the top of a mountain and the birds are singing and the sky is shining and, running through the fields of flowers. And, there's a euphoria when you're in love, or there's a deep sadness when you're experiencing grief, that you have to turn to symbols to express, because words, even those words, don't adequately express it. But that's all we have. That's why poetry, is popular because it expresses things that, with these symbols that are meaningful to people. So symbols convey deep and powerful meaning. Okay, so at this point, we're going to do something kind of fun. But before we do that, I'm going to open the floor to questions and answers, and then we're going to stop the live stream because we're going to have some little exercises here for the people who came in person, and then we're going to have this will be time for our memorial. Are there any questions about apocalyptic literature or what we talked about today? The content of Revelation we're going to do after lunch. We're going to talk about the opening vision, John's audience. We're going to talk about some of the famous symbols like 666 and Armageddon, and then we're going to talk about the meaning for us today and the judgment, etc. That'll be session 4. Are there any questions right now? Okay, so the live stream is going to stop, okay, Rod? And then live stream people, you can join us again at 12:45.